A thought occurred to me between episodes, dear listener. Last time we discussed Dreamwave's Transformers, Megatron had unleashed a techno-organic virus in northern Canada. The point of this virus was to consume all biological material on Earth, transforming it into a new Cybertron. The Autobots opposed this, and in the ensuing battle, General Hallow of the American Department of War Technology dropped a bomb on them all. The virus absorbed the energy of the bomb, trapping the Cybertronians in the sudden viral growth. But only for a time. When the Autobots finished coming to, the Decepticons had already fled the scene. They traveled to San Francisco and began an attack on the city, spearheaded by the massive combiner Devastator. This caused the Autobots to split up, with a portion remaining in Canada to fix their injured brethren and solve the threat of the virus, while the rest attempted to defend humanity. Thinking all of that over, a sudden question came to mind. Why is Megatron attacking San Francisco at all? His plan was to transform Earth, not terrorize humanity, at least in this instance. It's easy to overlook this lack of motivation because Megatron is the bad guy in our story, and attacking cities is something that bad guy robots do. Megatron's motivations generally are that simple. But this means that the Decepticons left the helpless Autobots in that dome when they could have killed them in order to launch this attack. My first thought was that this just seems like bad writing. We've certainly seen our share of it in this comic up to this point, but I think that author Chris Saraceni knew what he was doing here. He has been writing Megatron more like a tired soldier. If he can't return to Cybertron, then he wants to make a new home on Earth. Sure, he's okay with wiping out humanity to do it, but you want your house pest-free, right? And we have seen Megatron invite Optimus Prime and his Autobots to join him twice in our last 2 issues. He wants them around. He doesn't seem to want them dead. He is trying to convince them that he is right. So I think that Megatron moved the fight to San Francisco for 3 purposes. 1, some good old-fashioned destruction. I mean, even if you are adding depth to Megatron, he is still a bad guy, and he does like blowing stuff up. 2, he continues to show Prime what little regard humanity has for the Transformers in this attack. We have already seen humans use the Transformers as living weapons, stripping them of their free will and using them to kill other humans. Grimlock even switched sides because of it. And during the fight in San Francisco, we saw humans cursing Optimus Prime even after he took actions to save their lives. This fight isn't to just destroy buildings and kill humans. It is aimed at Prime's human-loving heart. And this one is the most critical thought in my mind. Number 3, Megatron is buying time. As far as he's concerned, his virus is unstoppable. Prime can't blast it, the humans' bombs have only fed it more energy. But that is only true so long as the Autobots can't focus on it. Megatron attacks humans in order to draw Prime and his Autobots' focus away from the virus. Given enough time, the virus will cover the globe, and so Megatron makes the biggest, most visible attack that he can, unleashing Devastator on San Francisco. Saraceni? I like your take on Megatron. This feels like a character who has been at war for hundreds, if not thousands of years. This feels like a carefully thought-out strategic move on his part. I feel like this kind of thought is something that's been missing from Megatron in general, to be quite honest. His plans are generally more silly than they are effective. As issue 5 of the miniseries opens up, we find a pair of human lovers enjoying the scenery in the Northwest Territories of Canada. They're a little bit randy, but before anyone can try to warm up their partner, they notice the ground transforming into gleaming metal. They panic and run in the opposite direction of this effect. This goes on until they happen to bump into a contingent of Autobots. Standing at their fore is Bumblebee, restored to his full glory. The other fixed Autobots surround him: Cliffjumper, Jazz, Mirage, Wheeljack, Brawn, Huffer, and Red Alert. They all have some kind of cannon gun in their hand, which is not a normal accessory for them, with a tube running from it to the center of their backs. Bumblebee poses heroically, announcing that the humans have nothing to fear. The Autobots are here. Brawn votes to take him back apart. Okay, Bumblebee replies. Ooh, tough crowd. Jazz leans down and tries to tell the humans to split, but warn them not to come around here because it's dangerous because of the virus, and they don't wait. The couple runs away, screaming that the robots are here to kill them. This reaction throws Jazz, so Mirage explains about the oil refinery attack. Humanity, in general, is pretty scared of them right now. Wheeljack interrupts. They can't focus on that at the moment. They've got bigger problems. The virus is continuing to spread, but he has come up with a solution. The blasters that they're carrying emit a high-power energy beam that destroys the virus and whatever it has consumed. The blasters are powered by themselves, though. The Autobots are the fuel source. The more of the virus that they blast, the weaker that they're all going to get. So it is time to make a decision. There is no half doing this. Either they stop the virus here and maybe die in the process, or it doesn't stop at all. The other Autobots answer simply. They switch on their blasters. The Autobots get to work blasting the virus. Jazz suddenly receives a distress call from Trailbreaker in San Francisco. They're in trouble! Superion is down, and they need backup! But Jazz shakes his head. No can do, my man. They need everyone that they have here to handle the virus. And besides, they thought that Prime's team had things handled. In San Francisco, we see Trailbreaker holding up one of Devastator's feet. The situation has changed! Devastator's foot smashes the Autobot into the concrete. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 21.4 of Dreamwave's Transformers, No Matter the Cost. When I opened this comic and I saw the lovey-dovey couple, I'm not gonna lie, I honestly groaned, like verbally, audibly groaned. We've got a mecha kaiju battle in San Francisco raging and a techno-virus threatening to turn the world into a gleaming disco ball in space, and you want to focus on two horny humans? Gag me with a spoon, Saraceni. But reading the entire scene, the humans actually play an important part in the Autobots' story. When the Autobots show up, we get this really silly moment. Bumblebee posing and never fearing the humans. This group of Autobots is clearly not a threat, and Jazz then goes out of his way to warn the humans about the threat that they are facing. Despite all of these positive behaviors, though, in trying to reassure humanity, the humans still run away in fear. This reinforces the idea that humanity fears the Transformers right now. And that's important because as the audience, we're not scared of these guys. We know that these guys at their core are heroes and have fought hard for humanity, that many of them were just disassembled and put back together in the name of defending humanity. We, as the audience, view them as heroes already. Author Chris Saraceni then has Mirage remind us that, intellectually, the humans fear them because of the Smitco attack. So we have the logical reason for why humanity fears them demonstrated, and then a living example with the humans. We get to see people run away in fear. This is then juxtaposed with the Autobots' mission. They can give their life energy to power a blaster that will save the Earth and potentially kill them, or they could do nothing and live. A mission to potentially die, saving a world that hates and fears them. And X-Men, I'm sorry for stealing your tagline. But the Autobots don't hesitate to do it. These boys are flooping legends! Oh, and they choose to do so even after being told that the San Francisco team needs help. These Autobots could abandon this fight. They could focus on saving their comrades, and honestly, I would have a hard time blaming them for choosing that. But instead, they have a job to do. Save the world here. Even if that means their friends die a continent away. Whew. As we join the San Francisco scene, things are honestly looking bad. Prime narrates the fight as we see Trailbreaker get crushed beneath Devastator's foot, and Prime's grim, honest tone hits home how bad things really are. His men have been in enough fights that they know when they can't win one. But they fight anyway. We see Sunstreaker and Sideswipe get clapped between Devastator's hands, dropping them. They fight because they can't retreat. They fight because they're Autobots. They fight because that's what they do. Optimus Prime is all that stands between Devastator and San Francisco. He transforms into car mode and speeds towards the giant. When he gets near enough, rockets erupt from underneath Prime, launching him into the air. He transforms again back to robot mode and smashes into Devastator's chest. Green metal crumples like aluminum foil underneath Prime's impact. He ejects his blaster rifle from his back, grabs it, cocks it, and fires point blank into Devastator's face. The giant falls backwards into the bay. Prime almost goes with him. He just barely manages to land on a dock, shattering it, and he then scrabbles back to shore. All of the water launched into the air by Devastator's impact falls back down as saltwater rain. A heavy foot drops on Prime's back. Megatron stands over him. "Good show, Prime," he says. "Impressive as always." He then invites Prime to have a chat, and we move away. Before we do that, though, let's break that down a little bit. This is a pretty simple scene that demonstrates the combat skill of Optimus Prime fantastically. As cool as it is, there is a bit of awkwardness to the fight for me. Because Devastator sees Prime coming, like, we have a full-page image of the big dummy staring Prime down from a distance. But rather than swat at Prime, or stomp at Prime, or kick at him, or do anything that's effective at all, he could literally just wait till Prime gets close enough and then knock a building over on top of him. But rather than do any of that, Devastator just stands there open-mouthed and lets Prime assault him. This scene feels less like it works because Prime is a great warrior, and more like it works because Devastator is not a great warrior. More importantly, though, this scene shows why it is important to never give up. We see Devastator smash Trailbreaker, beat two other Autobots, and then have Optimus flooping Prime tell us that in his estimation this fight is unwinnable. This is not a fight that Prime alone should win. But he doesn't give up. He continues to fight, and he floopin' wins it, baby! This is why you love Optimus Prime, and that's the truth behind this scene. There has always been a dumb optimism to the Transformers cartoon, and especially the movie, and now this comic book, and I really love that as a through line. That dumb optimism of, this probably isn't going to work, but we do it anyways, is something that I absolutely love about the Transformers franchise. Oh man, I'm coming down off a high on that one. We return to the C block of the Pentagon, where we find the still imprisoned Spite Wickwicki in his cell. He narrates for us, establishing how scared he is right now. He thinks that note that was slipped under his door is from Hallow, threatening him with death at 3 p.m. Spike's fears are centered around his death, sure, the how and the why of it, but mostly he's scared for his son, Daniel. What's going to happen to him and Carly, who I'm assuming is Spike's wife, because we've never met her once he's gone? The door beeps when an access card is swiped through the card reader outside. All right, Hallow, he thinks. Make it quick. The door opens. Spike recognizes the person. You. Whoever they are, they tell him to hurry. They don't have much time. Well, that's clearly not General Hallow, but author Chris Saraceni is trying to up the stakes of the storyline and add a little bit of drama to Spike's half of this narrative. I don't really know that it works. Spike is a pretty long-term character in the Transformers franchise, and having him get killed off seems, about as impossible as killing off Bumblebee for any notable length of time. That doesn't stop Saraceni from trying, at least, and I do give him credit for that. But this is 2 pages of a brown jail cell teasing an event that I find hard to believe that ends by subverting the very expectation that the author was setting up. Ultimately, these pages feel really wasteful to me. I do like the attention paid to Spike's character. Him worrying about his family is a great touch, and I like him confessing that he is scared to die. It's easy to forget when you're reading heroic fiction that the characters you're reading about don't think they're immortal. They can die in their world. And this story has made a point of killing Spike's dad, so there are some stakes to it. And even if we, as the outside observers, know that Spike isn't going to die, Spike still needs to think and behave like that's a possibility. I think that this moment could maybe have just been like a single page and just condensed Spike's thoughts down a little bit, and it still could have gotten its point across, and that would have left us another page for a cool robot fight scene or something. In Canada, the Autobots are beginning to slow down the strain of their own conflict. Their voices are cracking, their bodies beginning to slow down. Cliffjumper is the first of them to drop, falling to his knees. He pushes himself up, saying that he just needs a few seconds. As he fights through this exhausted state, a tank rolls into the series of panels from the right. It stops when the barrel plunks into the side of Cliffjumper's head. From inside of it, a voice announces that if the Transformers don't stop their attack on Canadian soil, they will destroy them. Cliffjumper stares down the barrel. Uh-oh. Okay, there's some good realism. Despite having so much of this story happen in Canada, we've really seen no interaction from the Canadian military or government in this comic up until now. Seeing them show up here does feel really late, but at least they did show up. I would have liked to have seen this bit set up, though. Perhaps after the failure to blow up the Transformers, General Hallow could have informed the Canadian government about the Transformers' presence there through a third party or something. He probably would have downplayed America's involvement and played up the threat of the robots, sicking the Canadian military on them, but I like that idea. Hallow is a general, so let's see him do some more strategizing here, please. Back in the Pentagon, we now find, Larry the janitor pushing a cart down a hallway. It is a big thing with 2 levels. The bottom level is curtained on all sides. And hopefully, listener, you can see where this is going. Larry gets to a secure room and gives Spike the all clear. As the younger man exits the cart, Larry lifts a tile off of the floor, talking about how sometimes, especially when he's going to bed, he can see ghosts. He pulls a manila file from the hidey hole and hands it to Spike. Typed across the cover are 2 words: Lazarus Project. Larry and the file explain some of the back matter of our comic. About 5 years ago, General Hallow began to work with a brilliant engineer named Adam Rook, who we know as Lazarus. Larry's brother was one of the men on their joint task force. Their initial job was to create transforming soldiers, clearly beings inspired by the Transformers. But they couldn't pull it off. So instead, they came up with a new plan. Instead of creating their own Transformers, they would find a way of controlling the existing ones. Now the trick was just getting their hands on some robots to experiment on. This was the drive behind America's alliance with the Autobots to capture the Decepticons. Once they had captured them all, Hallow and Rook began to experiment on the Decepticons in secret. And they did actually develop a program that would let them control the Transformers. But the problem now was that they couldn't use it. No way would the Autobots allow them to enslave the Decepticons and use them as living weapons. Unless they figured out a way to do the same to the Autobots. Spike closes his eyes. He can see where this is going. He groans. No. Once the plan to sabotage the Ark II was developed, Larry's brother wanted out. This was not what he signed up for. He started copying files, which Spike now holds in his hand, planning to blow the whistle on this whole thing. General Hallow made sure that he couldn't. When the Ark II exploded, Rook took the control files and experiment information and ran. With the Transformers blown up and inert across the globe, and Rook having taken the control program, Hallow was left with nothing. Spike now rushes Larry, shoving him against the wall. "Why didn't you do anything? You knew all of this and you stayed quiet? You could have stopped it!" But Larry was scared. They killed his brother so easily. Of course they could do the same to him. As Spike steps back, Larry crumples to the floor, crying. "So you just let them die," Spike says. "You're a coward. You are no better than them," meaning Hallow and Rook. "Please," Larry begs Spike, "help me. The ghosts. He can't take them anymore." Spike squats down and snatches the ID card off of Larry's belt. "They're your ghosts," he says. "You better learn to live with them." He leaves the room. "Damn, Spike, you're flooping cold." Larry did just tell him that he could have potentially saved his father, though, so I can see a lack of compassion for the man. Otherwise, this fills in most of the gaps in the setup for the story. We now know who Lazarus was and how he was able to develop the technology necessary to control the Transformers, which is great. But we still don't know why he chose to go rogue. I'm assuming, based on Lazarus's previous scenes, that he did it in order to make a ton of money. But nothing in this background indicates that he wasn't already getting paid. And Lazarus was clearly okay with doing some shady work for the US government, so it's not like he left because he disagreed with Hallow's morals and sabotaging the Ark too. Despite learning a little bit more about the man, I still don't feel like I really know Lazarus at all. And if this is a Transformers comic and they are going to be on Earth, that doesn't mean that the creative team just gets a pass on writing humans poorly. If humans are going to be involved in the story, then they need story consideration too. Otherwise, you could have set this story on Cybertron or any other planet and not have had these things at all. The biggest reveal here is that Hallow was co-developing the control program, and that he is the one who ordered the sabotage of the Ark too. He has officially gone from a patriot taking notably extreme measures to defend his nation, to a selfish madman trying to cover his own tracks. This is consistent with his past behavior, though. Remember when he told Prime that you need to sacrifice some lives in order to accomplish the mission? He could easily have been referring to the Ark 2 explosion. The real question for me now is whether Spike is going to do anything about it. He has been blaming the Transformers for the death of his father, but it was really the fault of General Hallow. And given his condemnation of Larry's choice not to confront Hallow or expose him, Spike would be a hypocrite if he ultimately did nothing. But that also means going up against a man who ordered the death of his father and all of those people, who had Larry's brother killed. The man who was okay with killing the Autobots if it meant hiding his mess. And who knows what he has planned for Spike. This sure seems like an impossible fight, echoing Prime's fight at the start of the issue, and that's some pretty good story symmetry. We still don't have a reason for why Megatron, and only Megatron, was able to slip the program's control though, so I ain't 100% pleased by this reveal. In San Francisco, Megatron and his forces have gathered up all of the Autobots. They are wrapped in I-beams, save for Prime, who is the only one still loose. But he is also still rattled, I guess, from fighting Devastator earlier, because he is not putting up much of a fight. Megatron monologues, stating that "I've stopped hating you, Prime, over the course of our exile on this planet. In fact, I've come to pity you, that such a mighty warrior could fall so low as to defend these weak, small flesh bags. It's a shame. Look at them, Prime." We then see a series of vignettes demonstrating how terrible humanity is. A group of humans leave a trapped man under a pile of rubble nearby. Another group are looting an electronics store. A news reporter shouts at her camera crew to hurry it up. This is a ratings bonanza. "The goodness that you see in them, the virtues that you praise, they don't exist. You've been fighting for what you want them to be, not what they are. Together, we could wipe them out, Prime. Start over on this planet. The universe could be theirs for the taking. All he has to do is say the word. The other Autobots will do whatever he does. Just say the word, Prime. This is a bit of a change from Megatron. There's been a lot of work done in the Transformers franchise to demonstrate that Prime does not hate Megatron. He disagrees with him, absolutely, and he does want to stop him in his goals, but generally speaking, Optimus Prime does not want Megatron dead. Conversely, Megatron's been pretty open about trying to kill Optimus Prime. He's in Megatron's way, so he's going to remove him, and it's generally that simple. But here, this monologue reveals a new side to Megatron. It reveals that he feels bad for him. But this doesn't change Megatron's basic motivation. He's still cool with the destruction of Earth and humanity. He wants a return to Cybertron. But he has watched Optimus Prime struggle for so long to defend a people that, honestly, as far as he's concerned, just aren't worth it. He's been injured, his own people have been dismembered and used by humanity, and after all that fighting, it has led to what? What have the humans learned from their example? How have they improved? They haven't. And this is perhaps the best sales pitch that I have ever read a Megatron make to an Optimus Prime. I don't think that Prime will agree with it. Like I said before, Optimus Prime is heroism personified, but I do think that that's a pretty good pitch. At DWT headquarters, which I would have assumed was at the Pentagon, but maybe it's not, we find General Hallow observing the conflicts. One of the men in the room suggests that they launch an aerial attack now, before anything worse can happen, but Hallow says no. That won't be enough. They need to take more permanent actions. Hallow pulls a key off of his neck and approaches a deck of computer consoles. The other officer blanches. Sir, you can't be suggesting... No, I won't let you do it. But Hallow shouts the man down. Either you stand down or I'll put you down. This isn't a game. These Transformers need to be eliminated. Rook played him for a fool, and he isn't going to let that stand. Hallow inserts the key and turns it, activating the United States' arsenal of nuclear weapons. He orders that their target to be set to San Francisco. I'll talk more about General Hallow after we break down issue 6 and we finish his entire story. I'm not going to really break this scene down. There's not a whole lot to it anyway, so let's just get right into it. Issue 6 opens on 2 different scenes playing simultaneously. One of them is of a hatch set into the stony mountains of, quote, the Pacific Islands, unquote. The other is at the Pentagon, where the President of the United States is arriving by helicopter. He's greeted by the not seen up to this point Defense Minister Dawson. They discuss the situation in San Francisco and the emergency response to it for a moment, before they get a call from the CIA. In the Pacific Islands, the hatch that we were shown slides open, revealing an intercontinental ballistic missile tipped with a nuclear warhead. The CIA tells Dawson that they have received an activation signal at one of their Pacific launch sites. Is he doing some testing that he didn't tell them about? The president snatches the radio out of his hand. No, they are not. They did not authorize a nuclear launch. He orders them to abort. But in the Pacific Islands, we see a single missile streak into the air. In Canada, 2 tanks are staring down the Autobot force that has been battling the spread of the techno-organic virus. Cliffjumper, in particular, lies directly in their sights. The soldier inside repeats his command for them to stand down. This is their last warning. Wheeljack, the farthest from the situation, starts to run forward. He shouts that they're making a mistake. They're trying to help. But the operator of the tank, who is scared and on edge, remember, all Transformers are enemies at this point, just sees a charging robot. He shouts for them to open fire, and they do. The tank that had been aiming at Cliffjumper quickly shifts its aim and blasts Wheeljack in the chest. Jazz and Mirage start forward as well, but another round explodes at their feet, driving them back. 2 more shots down Brawn and Red Alert. Despite all this, Wheeljack fights his way to his feet. His main concern is the virus. They can't let them hit the virus. Bumblebee dodges another round, and the explosion blasts the virus into the air. A wave of the virus rises and crests, coming down towards one of the tanks. In San Francisco, Megatron continues to make his sales pitch to Optimus Prime. It's pretty much what we've seen before, just summarized a little bit. But he does add in that this attack was all for Prime's benefit. Megatron needed to show him that humanity has not earned his faith. As he starts to ramp himself up to another monologue, Prime pushes him away. Enough! The effort costs him. Prime drops to his knees. Prime says that he knows that humanity is not like them. They have no inherent programming, no prime directive to guide their actions. Their actions, for good or for ill, are their own. To Megatron, this is a weakness, but Prime sees it as a strength. Yes, they do make selfish decisions. They are capable of great evil. But Optimus can see the few that choose to do good. He honors the ones who create their own prime directive, no matter the cost to themselves. As he says this, we see teams of paramedics working with injured survivors of the attack. A man rushes into a burning building, despite cries for him not to, because he knows that there's still more people who need help. Firefighters, concerned citizens, the kind-hearted. Wherever there is destruction, there are also people helping those who need it. That is who Prime fights for. Those few. Even when those few that he trusts turn against him. Grimlock, who is standing next to Megatron, hears this. And as Prime finds his feet, we see a handful of humans who notice his plight. "The Autobots need help!" one of them shouts. And some of them, not a lot, but some, run to their vehicles. "Save your rambling, Megatron," Prime growls. "Just pray that your next blast finishes me off. Because if it doesn't, I promise I'm going to tear you to pieces." Before Megatron can attack, 3 fire trucks are driven off of the collapsed highway. The drivers dive and roll out, shouting for Optimus to watch out. He manages to dive, and the explosion and impact of the fire trucks on Megatron and his forces now buys him a moment to act. Prime undoes the restraints on his men, evening the odds a bit. They gather and prepare for another round of combat, but Prime tells them to save Megatron for him. God, I love Optimus Prime. In the Pentagon, General Hallow is excited to see all of this finally come to a close. Rook, who we know as Lazarus, isn't going to get one over on him now. He won't be controlled. He will be the one to end this nightmare, no matter what it costs. Spike busts into the room, waving the Project Lazarus file in the air. He shouts that he knows what Hallow did. He knows all about the Arc 2 explosion. Spike tells him to shut the hell up and come quietly. Hallow draws his pistol and aims it at Spike. "You think I give a damn?" he shouts back. "I just launched a nuclear missile on American soil. You think they're just gonna let me go after that? No. Spare me the Boy Scout crap, Spike. You're starting to sound like Optimus Prime. Just shut up and enjoy the show with the rest of us." It's all about to end. On the screen behind him, we see a countdown to impact. T-minus 13 minutes. In Canada, the techno-organic virus begins to cover one of the tanks, driving its operators from it. The other tank panics and opens fire, feeding the virus more energy. Knowing how dangerous that is, Cliffjumper bends its cannon back on itself so that it can't fire. But inside, the operator freaks out and fires anyways. The bent cannon blocks the shell, causing a detonation at point-blank range to Cliffjumper, launching him backward. At this point, the Autobots are down. Fighting the virus drained so much of their energy already. Now they're taking damage from the humans? They can't do this anymore. The fight is over. Bumblebee tries to pull a tank operator from his tank before the virus infects it, but he doesn't make it in time. The virus consumes him in mid-step, and it cuts him off as he screams. Jazz and Red Alert suggest a retreat. They can work with the humans, organize an evacuation. They need time to re-energize. But Wheeljack won't have it. Any backup that the humans send will only act as fuel for the virus. If they don't stop it now, they don't stop it. As he argues with Jazz, Wheeljack looks beyond him, at a radio tower. And he has an idea. We're minus 9 minutes to impact. In the Pentagon, General Hallow has his pistol pressed into Spike's back. He must think that Hallow is evil after all of this. Sacrificing his father, sacrificing all of those lives on the Ark II, all the people in San Francisco. But you should know, Spike, that he isn't evil, and he won't apologize. Everything that he's done, he has done to keep this country safe. Spike doesn't buy it. You don't want the Transformers gone because it makes the world safer. You want them gone because you can't control them. This whole thing has been about power and control for Hallow. And what do you think keeps this country free, boy? Hallow shoves him to his knees. You're damn right it's about power. It's about having so much power that no other country in the world would dare oppose you. And if I can't do it, then no one can. He aims his pistol at Spike's head. When this is all over, Spike, when you get to go home and kiss your wife and child, when you get to tuck him into bed tonight, ask yourself, where does that sense of safety that they're enjoying come from? Who do you owe it to? The door opens and Dawson enters with a pair of guards. They draw their pistols and order Hallow to stand down. He's under arrest. Hallow whispers to Spike. The first thing that he learned in the Marine Corps was to never surrender. He turns, aiming his pistol, but the security detail is too fast. With just 2 shots, they kill General Hallow. Back in San Francisco, the battle between the Autobots and Decepticons has begun again. But now, we are down to fist versus fist. Metal punching metal. There's no fancy superpowers or combiner forms going to war here. Just old school violence. And as Prime and Megatron duke it out, Prime can't help but think that Spike is right. The war has gone on too long. Cost them all too much. A solid punch knocks Megatron on his rear. Optimus Prime has always dreamed of returning to Cybertron with Megatron as his prisoner. He now pulls a cracked I-beam from the rubble, and he positions it over Megatron's chest. Time for a change of plans. From nearby, Soundwave suddenly announces that he's got incoming. A nuclear projectile is approaching. Prime stops. No. Megatron just laughs. In Canada, Wheeljack begins to wire himself into the radio tower. In San Francisco, the aerial bots assemble into Superion and take to the air. As they do, Optimus reaches out, shouting for them to stop, and he narrates what happens for us. Quote, as leader of the Autobots, my directives tell me that the loss of my soldiers is inevitable. That if I lead soldiers into battle, I must be prepared to lose some along the way. That war comes with great sacrifice. But what my directives don't tell me, what they can never prepare me for, is just how much it hurts. Every time. End quote. Funneling his energy through the dish antenna, Wheeljack projects a wave of virus-destroying energy across Canada. Doing so takes every ounce of his spark, and he falls to the ground lifeless. Above the Pacific Ocean, Superion flies directly into the path of the missile and manages to intercept it. He is obliterated. But the detonation disrupts the ocean enough to kick a massive tsunami back at San Francisco. The last thing that Prime sees is a wave crashing over him and the city before darkness takes him. In Canada, human troops arrive on the scene of Wheeljack's sacrifice and find it clear of any virus. The Transformers did it, their commander says. They saved us. Prime comes to slowly, but when he does, Spite Witwicky stands nearby, still dressed in his Arctic clothing too, like, dude, it's hot out, take the jacket off. It's okay, Prime, he says, you did it. You saved everyone. The Autobot sits up. The Decepticons? Spike shakes his head. By the time that he got here, they were already gone. The military searched the area for any sign of them, but they found nothing. The important thing, though, is that they stopped the nuke. Muttering, I suppose, Prime looks over the scene. Smoke and debris still clog the air. Humans are being ferried into ambulances. Destruction is everywhere. "What is it, Prime?" Spike asks. I thought you'd be happy. The Autobots saved millions of lives." Prime doesn't see the lives that were saved, though. He sees the lives that were lost. Trailbreaker shouts for Prime's attention, and he takes him to an abandoned Grimlock, pinned beneath some metal. They free the big bot, and Optimus offers him a hand. Loyalty means nothing to someone like Megatron. Grimlock has been used and abandoned. But there's still time to make things right, Prime says. Grimlock can join them again, and things can be like they used to be. Nearby, a crowd of humans has already begun to gather. They hold up signs with anti-Transformers rhetoric on them and shout angrily for the robots to go home. Grimlock shakes his head. "Not even Prime can change things back now. Me cannot accept Prime's offer." Slowly, as he watches Grimlock walk away, Prime drops his arm. A part of him knew that Grimlock wouldn't take his offer, and a small part of him actually understands why. For the first time in this entire conflict, Prime knows that this time, things will never be the same. For as tonally uneven as this miniseries has been, I have to give author Saraceni credit for sticking the landing. By the time I got to the end of this issue, my own mood was somber, quiet, and contemplative. I'd really been affected by it. This surprised me, largely because characters like Wheeljack and Superion have had almost no personality in these comics at all. If you're someone who walked in fresh off the street and bought this miniseries and read it, their deaths would probably have little emotional impact in and of themselves. But we don't get to experience their deaths through their own eyes. We get to experience them through Prime's eyes, and that's really what makes them hit home. Saraceni has excelled in his handling of Optimus Prime in this comic, and having these two scenes play out simultaneously to the audience, allowing Prime to comment on them both, even though he is unaware of Wheeljack's sacrifice, is great. Saraceni's pacing in this final issue overall is super well done, too. I've had minor complaints throughout this series. There's always been a scene in one of these issues that I could have lived with being cut, or maybe having it shortened or extended in the name of effectiveness, but I think that this issue hits all of the right notes. We need to see the President's reaction to establish that General Hallow has gone totally rogue. We need his confrontation with Spike in order to close out his narrative. We need the Canadian group of Autobots to get their no swearing rocked, forcing Wheeljack into one last desperate action. It all plays out really carefully and, for the most part, impactfully. Prime's narration is consistent with his voice from the previous issue, and, as I've said before, Saraceni really nails it. It really helps to sell how desperate things are here at the end, or how determined Prime is to stop this war. That moment when he was actually going to plunge an I-beam into Megatron's chest? Holy crap, y'all, I have never seen Optimus Prime so ready to no swearing kill Megatron. Even in the animated movie, when Prime and Megatron duke it out for the quote-unquote last time, it still doesn't really feel like Prime wants to kill Megatron. He hesitates again and again, and in the cartoon, we never have a moment where we're placed inside Prime's mind. We never get to know what he is thinking when he hesitates there, but here we are. Here, we know that he was getting ready to kill Megatron. That revelation alone is kind of chilling. But then you add on Superion's sacrifice and Wheeljack's, and this issue has some real emotional damage going on in it. General Hallow's behavior does come off as a bit staged, I have to say. There's always been an air of threat to Hallow, going back to issue 1 when he met Spike for the first time and basically kidnapped him as politely as possible. Then we saw his willingness to sacrifice people, at least in theory, in issue 3 during his discussion with Prime. That was a bad sign. Then, at the end of that issue, we had the first bombing out in rural, generally unoccupied Canada. So okay, that's not a great thing to have happen, but it's not that bad. It's not like any humans really got hurt, right? He's maybe desperate at this point, but still not quite a villain. Then he activates a nuclear missile and directs it at an occupied city. And okay, suddenly, we have a new bad guy. The thing that surprised me the most about this turn was how myself personally, suddenly saw Hallow as the bigger threat than Megatron. I kept wanting to write about how Hallow was suddenly the true threat revealed, but why? Hallow's missile launch is definitely the act of a madman, and would have killed millions, affected millions more, and had long-lasting impacts on America and the world, for sure. But Megatron had unleashed a virus in Canada that was threatening the world. If left unchallenged, Megatron's plan would have killed everyone on the planet and completely reset life on Earth. It is certainly no less of a threat than Hallow's nuclear missile. If anything, it is a bigger threat. So why did I keep thinking of Hallow as the worst enemy? That comes down to the uneven tone of the writing. Megatron's plan is grandiose and cartoonish. The idea for it comes from nowhere, the ability to execute it comes from nowhere, and the ability of the Autobots to fight back against it is equally silly. They literally just plug blasters into their backs and shoot it, and this form of energy, for whatever reason, doesn't feed the virus. Yeah, okay, sure, whatever, I guess. But a nuclear missile is a real threat. That's something that I have some degree of familiarity with. I've seen the footage of nuclear explosions. I've read about the damage they've done. I know about their long-term impacts. The threat posed by Hallow feels more realistic, and so I fear it more, and I automatically think of him as more dangerous than Megatron. I do hate the way that Hallow's general story plays out here. I applaud the one officer at the end of issue 5 who protested the launching of the missile, but then that guy also did nothing of value to try and actually stop Hallow. I'm frustrated that after learning about the missile launch, neither the president or the defense minister contacted anyone at the Pentagon and ordered them to place Hallow under arrest. We literally wait for them to arrive for anyone to do anything about that. I'm annoyed that America didn't do anything to stop that missile either. Couldn't the president or the defense minister have ordered to just launch some jets and shoot the thing down? And don't get me wrong, I understand that there is still the loss of human life to consider, but it is America's missile being launched at an American city here. How could they not take action to stop it, even if it meant spending the life of a pilot? Instead, we have escaped prisoner Spike Wickwicki running around the Pentagon free until he manages to stumble into the room that Hallow was in. He threatens him despite having no weapon and no authority to actually do so, and Spike is then forced to just stand around and listen as Hallow rants. Despite being the human-level stand-in for this story, Spike is really only used as a vehicle to engage with certain parts of the narrative. He doesn't get to be a character in his own right. Spike doesn't stop Hallow, even though it is dangerous, and even though that would have been the perfect bookend to this story. Spike starts the story off disillusioned with the Autobot crusade. He hates their war because of what it's cost him personally and humanity in general. But Prime understands that you fight in order to stop bad actors, to stop madmen like Megatron and madmen like General Hallow. Sometimes that does cost lives, and that is terrible and a tragedy, but it doesn't mean that you don't fight them. Saraceni perfectly put Spike into a position to fight Hallow in order to stop him. We even have an ally in that one protesting officer. Spike should have tackled Hallow or charged at him, and yes, maybe have been shot at, maybe have been injured in doing so, if that meant stopping him. He would have survived, sure, because he's Spike, but it would have helped Spike to better understand Prime and his actions more, which would make his final scene here with Prime work a little bit better. As it is, Spike congratulates Prime on stopping the missile and saving lives, but he's also backpedaling on his position from earlier in the story. Spike's initial complaint is that the war between the Transformers has killed humans and ruined lives. He even says outright, maybe Earth would have been better off without them all. But now, after the deaths at Lazarus's facility, the deaths at the Smitco oil refinery, and all the death and destruction in San Francisco. And don't tell me that tsunami didn't additionally kill people. Now, Spike is happy that the Autobots are around? Even with the Decepticons back on the loose? The war between them is only going to go on from here. And don't get me wrong, I actually like this bit of hypocrisy, actually. Spike is caught up in the moment, and he's right. The Autobots did save lives. They do have cause to be happy. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't right before. And Saraceni acknowledges that even Prime knows it. Even in victory, and even despite victory, I should say, Optimus Prime views this success as a failure. There are what feels like a million small ideas that go ignored or are passed over in the story that I could additionally complain about, including the fact that there's a lot of Canadian military terms applied to the American military. I'll fully admit I'm not very familiar with the American military. I'm really not. And actually, in reading somebody else's commentary about this comic online is when I read that the Canadian terms were being used. And I was like, oh, well, on the one hand, there's an amount of that making sense because the authors were based in Canada, and this story was written in the early 2000s, so I doubt that they were very familiar with the American military world when they wrote this story, other than, what they learned in movies, which is pretty much what I know about the American military, so I can't be too upset at them for that. The rest of this stuff, though, well, Superion rushes to intercept the nuclear missile, but why not just have one of the aerial bots sacrifice themselves instead of all of them? In terms of sheer manpower, the Autobots have just lost a huge advantage in their war. And it did happen in the heat of battle, and I can see all of the aerial bots rushing to action and quickly just deciding to go as one because they're heroes, but still, it is a bit of a bummer, and it is a rather notable loss on the Autobots' side of this conflict. The Autobots don't get a lot of combiners. Superion is one of the most notable ones, and having him dead, that's going to make things really hard. Devastator, speaking of combiners, last that we saw was knocked into the bay, but he was also still active, so I'm assuming that he is still out there. Did he just crash into the water and then, call a timeout? Like he lands in the water and half his face is missing, and he's just like, you know what? This day's not gone how I thought it would. I'm just going to stay here. Megatron can figure out whatever else is going on. God damn. I mean, I guess that's what happened, but Devastator does feel like an abandoned idea by the time you get to the end of this issue, especially given how prevalent he was in issues 4 and 5. When Wheeljack broadcast his energy and stopped the virus at the end of the issue, we are shown the Canadian landscape that had been transforming, and there are evergreen trees standing and alive on it. This implies that organic matter could be restored. So were the humans? We saw one tank operator, and of course Lazarus, get turned into viral load, I guess. Are they now restored? And if not, what happened to them when Wheeljack's energy washed over them? And speaking of Lazarus, we're told that Hallow's driving motivation was his lack of control over the Transformers. But Lazarus's base should still have computers and files in it. Even if the base is currently without power because Megatron tore it up, so long as the hard drives are not damaged, you could retrieve the control program, maybe even reverse engineer it. That's probably one of my biggest overall complaints about this series. The book does a lot of work to establish Lazarus and Hallow as real, legitimate, understandable, almost compelling human characters. But then it also kills them off without a second thought. If the Transformers are going to remain trapped on Earth, then their interactions with humans are going to be a part of their narrative going forward. As I said earlier, you could have just made a comic set on Cybertron otherwise and skipped all of this noise. We are on Earth. They're going to be interacting with humans to some degree, so you might as well make those humans interesting. I would have loved to have seen both men as ongoing threats to the Transformers. Lazarus could have teamed up with Megatron in order to use his program to enslave the Autobots. General Hallow's continued presence in the American military could have kept the Autobots and Decepticons on the run. Take some of that police state we are always watching energy that was prevalent post 9/11 and turn it on the Autobots. Make them earn that robots in disguise tagline, baby. Human plus Autobot stories are generally boring because the humans are never going to be more interesting than the Autobots. But honestly, what that means is that the writers just need to write better humans. There is potential here, and I hate that it was thrown away so casually in this story. We also have Grimlock still on the loose, and this is perhaps my biggest personal gripe about Optimus Prime in this story. And if you didn't tell by now, I love Optimus Prime in this story. Prime's whole shtick really boils down to power and the responsible use of it. Where Megatron wants power for personal gain, Prime uses his power to fight for those who have none. In this story, Grimlock attacked humans. He destroyed buildings. Even if he didn't choose to kill anyone, he still attacked human forces. He was a Decepticon, even if for only like 5 minutes. Shouldn't someone hold him accountable for that? Even if Prime wasn't willing to turn Grimlock over to humanity for judgment, and I mean, I'd get it if he didn't want to do that, shouldn't he have at least taken him into some form of custody? And actually, what happened to the other Dinobots? Slug, Snarl, Swoop, and Slash. Are they on Earth? Like dormant somewhere like the rest of the Autobots were? If Grimlock meets up with them, are they just going to follow his factionless lead from now on? Because that is a really dangerous group to be harboring anti-human sentiment. And that's a great plotline. Overall, I gotta say, I still enjoyed this miniseries. If this is the worst of Dreamwave's Transformer comics, then as far as I'm concerned, that's a good sign. The handling of Optimus Prime and Megatron is super well done, the book has some pretty big stakes, and its examination of heroism and the cost of heroism is fascinating. It does have an uneven tone that it struggles to find a balance for. This comic is both as silly as the cartoon in some places, and as serious as a more modern war movie in others. Maybe those two things can't be reconciled in one story, and I would argue that the worst parts of this comic come from that lack of cohesion. But when things get serious, the book really manages to sell it, and I do think that there's some really good character work and thematic work here. Thinking it over, I'm kind of amazed at how final this book feels having read it. There is no setup for a sequel series, which there was, published 6 months after this series closed out, and that's kind of surprising. We have this super sad bummer of an ending with one last look at Wheeljack's prone form and Optimus musing on the cost of combat, and it's just a real bummer, especially given how well received this comic was at the time of its release. This book was like a top 10 book when it was getting its initial release. You'd really think that Dreamwave would have been like, yeah, we already greenlit series 2. Hey, we're working on it, guys. It's gonna be here eventually. But there's nothing. This book ends and you are sad and it's over with. Which, to be fair, isn't a bad thing. Sadness is not a bad emotion, and I would argue that the author's ability to make me feel something for these rather flat, one-dimensional characters is kind of amazing. I'm just surprised that a well-selling, popular at the time of release book like this ends on such a downer of a note and with no hint or teasing of a sequel. There's not even a setup for the sequel here. There's unresolved things, sure, but there's no promise that those things are going to be addressed at some point. It's weird. Next time, we're moving on to something different. While I did enjoy reading this comic, its very standalone ending does not entice me to read on at all. I do have the next Transformers Generation 1 miniseries, don't get me wrong. I'm just not interested in covering it right now, for whatever reason. If you would like to hear me break that one down someday, let me know, dear listener, at the usual places, Facebook, email, whatever. I am not opposed to covering that miniseries, I'm just not excited to do it right now. Instead, we're going to be switching gears. Back in 2020, a long-defunct comic book company came back from the dead and started publishing some new material. Milestone Comics is an early 90s legend to me, launched during the 90s boom, but dying by 1997, shortly after I got into comics, but before I had the internet access to learn anything about them. They are most well known for the character Static, who went on to have a very successful cartoon called Static Shock, and it is through him that I really learned about Milestone at all. So when the company announced plans to publish new material, I was intrigued at the idea, and I've picked up everything that they have published since. But, as somebody new to the characters and company, I thought that would be fun for us to take a look at those books. Like, let's see what hits and what misses, and see where the company might be going. I love exploring a new continuity on the ground floor. Oh, it reminds me of the cross-gen days. I miss you so much, cross-gen. Right now, I'm planning for approximately 5 episodes. One for a quick history of the company and their launch one-shot, then 1 episode each for their series on Static, Icon and Rocket, and Hardware, and then a combined episode probably covering their 2 currently running books, Blood Syndicate and Duo. Rather than doing a full-scale breakdown of them, though, these reviews are going to be a little bit more freeform. I'm going to read the comics, I'm going to record my thoughts on them, so if an episode is particularly short, I might combine a book or 2 together. These are probably going to vibe a little bit more like the House of X, Powers of 10, X-Men things that I did, way back then. We're going to see. Then I want to do a little Halloween set of episodes that I'm starting to mull around in my head what I want to do, because I want to do something different, but I'm still writing that one. So next week, I will be doing a quick history lesson on what Milestone Media was, and where they have been since they initially shut down. Then we'll be talking about the one-shot that relaunched their publishing initiative. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 22.1, Milestone Returns. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.